Alaikum. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the IIIT, the International Institute of Islamic Thought. And we have another lecture in our spring 2016 lecture series. Dr. Paul Shore, who is adjunct professor of religious studies, University of Regina. That's what I understood, that's how the locals call it in Canada. And it is, I think, first of all, to explain to you a little bit about the background to all of this. Dr. Shore and I have met about 45 minutes ago. We've never met before. We've met only through correspondence and through grant applications that he sent our way. Many of you know that the IIIT gives out small research grants to academicians, scholars, professors at universities in North America. And Dr. Paul Shore was one of the applicants, and we found in our research committee his topic extremely intriguing. It's a little bit outside our main core areas of research and expertise, but I think in some ways that made it even more intriguing for us about this early translation of the Qur'an into the Latin language. And we felt that we wanted to support this research, and I think that Dr. Shore is about halfway through, and we hope that maybe by end of the year, early next year, he'll be able to produce an outcome that hopefully will get published in either our journal or maybe later on even a book. So it's really a good display of some of the work that we do here at IIIT in terms of supporting research of various individual scholars around North America. It is also, I think, what is also interesting for us and really appealing in terms of this particular research is because it talks about the Muslim-Christian encounter and contact. And again, I'm sure many of you know that the IIIT and the people associated and affiliated with IIIT are pioneers of interfaith dialogue and engagement here in the United States. The Institute has over the years supported many interfaith initiatives ranging from individuals and individual discussions at the community level, but also at the academic level, including a very highly successful, I would say, relationship that we have with Hartford Seminary in Hartford, Connecticut. Actually, the president of Hartford Seminary was here just this morning where we discussed some of the areas of collaboration. And Hartford Seminary specializes in Christian-Muslim relations and understanding, and has been doing so for about 100 years through the MacDonald Center for Muslim-Christian Dialogue Understanding. And in recent years, Hartford Seminary, which is a Christian seminary, has emerged as one of the leaders in Islamic education, providing educations to imams, Muslim chaplains, and Muslims in general who are interested in both Islamic education but also within a traditional seminary, theologically oriented setting in North America. In addition to Hartford Seminary, we also have excellent relations with other seminaries, including most recently with Union Theological Seminary, the oldest seminary in the United States, where we are co-sponsoring and working together, collaborating on a program that they've just launched last week, and I was there in New York City when they did that, on Islam, social justice, and interfaith engagement. So again, this is another example. It goes without saying that IIIT is extremely and deeply committed to interfaith engagement, and we really don't talk anymore about interfaith dialogue. We talk about interfaith engagement and education. And so I'm personally involved with one such project through Hartford Seminary and Luz Foundation to interfaith education. How do we educate diverse population in the United States and in Canada that is coming from various walks of life, Muslims and Christians, in today's world, to be aware of each other's faiths, strengths, similarities, differences, with the ultimate goal of deepening our faith in our respective traditions. So I won't talk too much more about that, but I wanted to contextualize this for you so that hopefully you can get a good picture of why the IIIT would be interested in research like this, even though it sounds very specialized and in many ways. So Dr. Shore is going to present this research to us. I gather he's been to Italy to study ancient manuscripts, as it were, and he's going to have a follow-up trip to Europe to continue this study, and has been Library of Congress and many different places. So we would now give him about 35 to 40 minutes, plus minus,
Sure.
to present his current state of research to us. And then after that, we're going to open it up for Q&A, and we're going to end this evening and this lecture at 7:30. So once again, welcome to Triple IT. It's good to have you here.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Triple IT for inviting me and for supporting this. I'm going to try to make this not a terribly boring talking head piece, because it's actually kind of a fascinating and mysterious story. A word or two about how I got to this place. I'm a newcomer to Quranic studies, only for the last couple of years. For about 25 years, I have researched and written about the Jesuits in various places in the world, particularly in Eastern Europe. More towards the end of that work, I kept running into references where Jesuits would meet Muslims. I'm speaking of the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. Sometimes there would be a word of Turkish or Arabic in the reports that were sent to Rome. Occasionally there'd be a description of a woman who was persuaded to take off her veil and become a Christian. But usually these were fragmentary pieces that didn't add up to a coherent picture, and I realized this was one part of my bigger project looking at Jesuits that I really didn't understand. And that dovetailed very nicely with a sense that I was getting increasingly, that every day I was hearing about the Qur'an in the media. Some expert was telling me what it was all about, but that was always secondhand information, and some of these experts, as they say in Britain, were looking a bit dodgy. So I thought it was probably time to take the plunge and actually look at this document, both as a historian interested in that exchange that Ermin just referenced, and also because I really needed to decide for myself about some of the things that were being claimed about this very significant document. So I took the plunge, and the first thing that I learned, which a lot of you may already know quite well, is that hundreds and hundreds of years passed before any Western European Christian made more than a weakly and inadequate attempt to translate even a chunk of the Quran. Hundreds of years. It was the 13th and 14th century before an Englishman working for a Frenchman went to Al-Andalus. His name was Robert of Ketton. Sometimes it appears as Robert of Retton, but that's just because his handwriting was poor. It places Ketton in England, where he produced what might generously be called a translation, and you can go to Google Books and have a look at it yourself if you like. I've managed to scratch up a title page of one of these versions, but this is, not only is this very late, it gets published so that it's distributed in Western Europe in 1543, roughly 900 years after the Quran is revealed to the Prophet. It then is taken to France and Italy, where it is translated into those two languages. The Italian version is then translated into German. The German translation is then translated into Dutch. And we're way up the creek at this point, because this is pretty sad stuff. I spend a moment or two on this because it is this translation, which is sort of a mutated translation, of which this is a title page of the Latin, that Jesuits carry with them when they travel to various places where Muslims live, whether it's the court of the Great Mogul, whether it's North Africa, the slave pens of Malta, or Egypt. So off I go trying to figure out what's the Jesuit-Muslim connection. And I run on the internet into a name just sort of stashed away in the corner, Ignazio, a.k.a. Niccolo Lomellini, who seems to have been very involved in this. And I can't find any publications connected with this man. Either produced, he's a Jesuit, produced by the Jesuits or about the Jesuits. He didn't leave really any footprint to speak of on the internet. He lived in the 17th century. And finally, a Spanish colleague who I also had never met just like her, wrote to me and said, yeah, I have some material on this guy, and you're most welcome to it because I've got millions of other things to do. Would you like some digital images of the work that he did? I said, yes. This is not Lomellini. I don't have a picture of the mysterious Father Lomellini. This is Cardinal Alessandro Wenceslaso Carlo Orsini, a patron of Galileo. Yeah. And the Orsini name may be familiar to some of you who are interested in history because Orsinis were popes. They were princes of the Holy Roman Empire. They were dukes of Parma now and again. They were major players. This Orsini died at the age of 34. For some peculiar reason, he's not in the standard biographies of any cardinals, and I've looked on both sides of the Atlantic. And he is the patron of Father Lomellini and the man to whom Lomellini dedicated his translation of the Qur'an. I don't know why. I do know two other things about this man. One is that he collected Arabic manuscripts. He lived in the late 16th and early 17th century. He led private, behind-the-door discussions of philosophy and religion in his villa outside of Rome. And he acted as a godfather to a number of small children who were born Muslim on the Italian peninsula and were baptized into Catholicism. I am attempting to find out what became of the man's library. There are Lomellini archives both in Los Angeles and in Rome, but he is a rather obscure person, but clearly looms very large. He is a man of rather broad intellectual interests for the times. He's obviously a committed Catholic, baptizing Muslims into the Catholic faith, but he seems to have a serious interest in the cultural products of historically Muslim societies. And he was willing to apparently secretly support this Jesuit while this Jesuit went about his multi-decade task of translating the Quran into Latin. This is what I've got on my man. This says, Yo, Niccolo Lomellini. This is a signature of the not-so-young Niccolo Lomellini when he joined the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, in 1588, the year of the Spanish Armada. And I didn't want to bother you with the rest of this page. This is from an archive in Rome. But he has to hand over all his personal possessions when he joins up. He's becoming a priest. And among his possessions include a diamond ring, very fancy clothes, and a bunch of religious books, which I've been scrutinizing to try to figure out what his views were when he began his work. I don't have a picture of Lomellini. I do have this to just give you an idea of the man's background. He came from one of the most prominent families in Genoa, which was a republic in the 17th century. And by a republic it means that periodically when their dictator died, they elected a new dictator. So it's not a republic in the way that we would use the word today. The Lomellinis, and you're looking at a different Niccolo, and you're also seeing John Niccolo in the middle, and their mother and grandchildren. But this painting was done by Anthony Van Dyck. It's in the National Gallery in Edinburgh, Scotland, and it just gives you some sense of the political power, the military power, and the wealth that this very well connected young man was coming from when he joined the Jesuits. The rest of the story about him that's a bit unusual is he lived to be 81. He's from this noble family. He lived his whole life in Rome. And there's virtually no records about anything that he did while he was a Jesuit for 60 years. And this may simply not seem very significant, but if you've ever looked at any things that Jesuits do, one, they're compulsive writers. They leave records of everything, very articulate records, very interconnected records, very legible records. And two, they're tremendously proud of people who join their organization. I'm speaking in the present tense, but I mean in the 17th century, if those people are well-connected and noble. So here's this noble young man. He lives for decades. He lives in Rome. He's apparently spending most of his time translating the Quran. And I won't go so far as to say that it's hush-hush, but the silence is deafening. Okay, enough to sort of set this History Channel drama before we get to the main event. This is the document that I've been able to take a close look at thanks to IIIT. Now, I'll just say a couple things about this. What you're looking at is actually a digital image of a microfilm copy. And that explains the horizontal lines mostly towards the top of the page. I'm including it because, and I'll give you some close-ups in a minute, because this shows you how this man went about this task. This is the first complete, accurate translation of the Quran into any Western European language, not just Latin, and it includes an entire text of the Quran broken up ayah by ayah. If you look carefully, you can see some Arabic there. And the other thing that's curious here is that this is obviously not a final version. This is a crossed out copy. This is the only copy that I know of that exists. It's in the University of Genoa Library. Yeah, maybe could we blow that up a bit? Would people want to see a little bit? I don't know if that, yeah, so that's brilliant. That'll do it. So what you've got here, you've got three things that I'd like to call your attention to. One is the Arabic. Now, a colleague of mine in Spain said, Lomellini didn't write that Arabic. It's too tidy, etc., etc. And she even suggested that it was done by a Maronite Christian. I don't know. I'm inclined to think that Lomellini may have actually written that Arabic. If he didn't, he's got someone right at his elbow, because it's really seamlessly, it doesn't look like something that was either squeezed into the Latin. Everything else you see is Latin. This is from 1622. So it either wasn't added later, nor does it look like the Latin is sort of jammed in to accommodate the Arabic. So if this is a collaborative effort, A, we have no clue who the person fluent in Arabic was, who was Lomellini's collaborator, and B, in my view, there's less evidence to support that than there is evidence. Now, there are three things, well, actually four things on every sheet of this document. One is the Arabic, which I have found, and I have not been through absolutely every word of this, but I have found only two mistakes in the Arabic that I can identify, copying mistakes, and they are quite trivial. So the Arabic is really pretty clean, pretty good, given the context. Directly below it is a literal translation into Baroque Latin, which is to say the Latin that educated people used, whether they were Catholic or not, in the 17th century. Below that is a commentary. And it's almost as if two different people are speaking. And when I get closer to the end of this and try to justify why this is even worth doing, looking at an old piece of paper in an Italian library, one of my arguments is going to be because both of these things, the translation and the commentary, are a window into someone's head who is engaging at least with a document of Islam, if not with actual Muslims. The translations, in my view, range from the really quite good to the occasionally stumbling and lost. Lomellini does not know that the Arabic word for elephant is fili. He does not know this. He simply copies, he transcribes into a Latin form the Arabic word that he has.
This is from the second chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah.
Yes.
And it's interesting, he's actually missing one word in both successive ayat.
Okay, you've spotted something. This is great.
Yeah.
Okay, you've spotted this. We'll have to talk about this later. So there's a missing word. Okay. In both.
Here and there.
And you know, when you deal with manuscripts, this is a fascinating problem because not just in Arabic, but in any language, you will have words that are missing. You will have words that appear twice because it's written at the end of the line and then written again. And every so often in Latin, this leads to major differences in meaning. And again, I don't know what light this sheds on the question of whether it's one person or two who's involved with this. But at any rate, you have the translation. In some ways, the translation is really strong. In some ways, in my view, it betrays a real lack of knowledge of Muslim sensibility and how Muslims live. The commentary is all about being a Catholic priest in the 17th century, a century in which Europe is racked by intra-Christian warfare. So much, the bottom half of what you're looking at is, you can perhaps even make out you can see the line that is the translation, and then below it says duosic ad noto Mohammedis errores, and this is the errors, the alleged errors of Muhammad, and he's launching right into a point-by-point debate that he might have had with a Calvinist, that he might have had with a Lutheran, that he might have had with a Jew about, you've made two errors, and I'm going to explain this logically. First, using definitions, and second, by using syllogism. It's classic Jesuit stuff of the period. Formal logic, rhetoric, poking at people. So it's almost as if different parts of this man's brain are activated. His linguistic skills, not perfect, come into play in one point, but his pedagogical and debating and Jesuit-trained polemical skills come into play in another way. Now, if I can back out just a little bit to show you another part of this. How do I make it just a bit smaller? I just scoot it over. Okay, great, thank you. Now, I can move this up here. Other things, the fourth piece of this, you have the Arabic, you have the literal translation, you have the commentary, which is typically 3 or 4 times longer than the original document, and then you have things in the margin, which I am assuming are added later. That's why they're in the margin. And it is in the margin where you find comments such as, go and look in the Tractatus de Morte, the treatise that deals with death, that is bound in red leather, because you will find the Arabic word that you want in this place. This particular reference on this page, you may be able to make out the word in the third line of the largest marginalia. It says al-Faqih. This is a Latin rendering of the Arabic for the criterion, but what he's talking about here is a partial translation of the Qur'an done by a Muslim cleric who became a Christian priest in southern Spain in the early 16th century. So there are these little shoots and connections that suggest what sources this man had to work with. What he doesn't seem to have is a backlog of Arabic texts and real-life Muslim people to interact with. This seems to be an act of book learning, which I think is relevant because it is book learners like this who then trained missionaries who went out and who attempted to convert Muslims on site. And just to give 2 examples of how that actually played out, 2 things that I think, and I don't think my Jesuit colleagues and friends will mind my saying this, but there's 2 things that characterize a lot of Jesuits of this period. One is an amazing optimism that everything can be sorted out, even when things are looking bad. I call them the SpongeBobs of the Baroque era. The other thing that fits with that optimism is they're looking for the unified system that explains everything. The theory that integrates all languages. The mathematical equation that would account for the epicycles in the planetary motion without having to tip a hat to Galileo. In the case of the Jesuits, they knew that Arabic and Hebrew are both Semitic languages. And the same thing that motivated Jesuits to go to Belgrade, Serbia, where people speak Serbian, and preach in Czech. Why do you think they did that? Because both languages are Slavic languages, and there were quite a few Bohemian Jesuits. Well, if you're doing more than ordering a beer in Belgrade, Czech really won't get you too far. You might get some bread out of it. But you're definitely not going to be able to explain the most holy and indivisible Trinity in Czech talking to people that speak Serbian. In the same way, you have a platoon of Maltese Jesuits, Maltese being ultimately a Semitic language, although it has lots of words like grazie in it that come from someplace else. But you take these Maltese speakers and you take them to Algeria and expect that they will be able to proselytize in that environment. Well, that's sort of looking for that commonality, reducing things to a commonality, is what a lot of these side comments are really all about. Again, This is a close-up that I thought you would enjoy having a look, and maybe some of you will have some observations or comments. This is the same page that we just looked at, but to just sort of show it to you a little bit more closely, and also how this guy is struggling. He'll translate something, he'll cross it out, and then he'll come back to it and fuss with it. And I even found instances where he's crossed out a word, he's added another word, he's crossed out the second word, and he's gone back to the first word, and he's struggling with lexical choices. I mentioned the elephant problem. That's just he hasn't met a real-life Arabic speaker who could tell him what the word for elephant is and has been for a very long time. But there's also other situations where very interesting choices are made. Lomellini's a Catholic priest. He is not by temperament or training sympathetic to Islam. Let me be very honest about that. There are places where he acknowledges the power and beauty of a passage in the Qur'an, but then very quickly says, but it's in error for these reasons. However, despite the fact that he's just sort of by nature not well disposed, nonetheless, he's made some interesting choices. He's chosen to translate Allah as Deus. Deus is the standard version for the word for God. It is also a word that is very deeply embedded in Catholic liturgy and would be claimed as property of Catholics by Catholics in this time. Why has he done this? I don't know. Why has he kept the word al-Faqih as an Arabic or quasi-Arabic word and translated this other word? Other places, he's fudged. He's chosen over and over again to translate the Arabic Isa as Jesus Christus, Jesus Christ. That is arguably a bit of a cheat. And it also helps his other arguments later on. He moves in and out of vocabulary that is shared by the Hebrew Bible, by Christians, and also by Muslims. Noah comes out as Noé with an E at the end, which is the standard Latin term, and so on. And then in some cases, he shows a sort of superficial yet fascinating knowledge of things. He realizes that al-Kitab has in its root meaning something to do with the household, something to do with people gathered together, possibly in some sort of household relationship. And so he uses words like familiares. But then, as a Spanish colleague of mine pointed out, he got the like look it up in the dictionary part right, but he totally missed what the real deeper meaning was. So there's an interesting mix of things going on here. Just a close up on al-Faqih a little bit, and right below it you can see P, that's for pater, meaning father in Latin. Guadagnolis. Philip Guadagnoli was the first man to translate the Bible into Arabic. So here we have something going in another direction. They're contemporaries. Did they know each other? Clearly, Lomellini is aware of Guadagnoli's work, and since he's quoting a folio, my archival antennae start pulsing, because that's probably not a book. Otherwise it would be PAG for pagina, a page. So he's got his hands on an unpublished thing by this other writer who is a scholar writing into Arabic from the Latin of the Christian Bible. There's a very obscure book in the University of Genoa Library that I was pointed to that says that Guadagnoli and Lomellini actually collaborated together on the production of this very important Arabic Bible. Very important, certainly, in the history of Christian missions. I think the verdict is still out on that one. I'm not sure about that. Here's another marginalia. And I apologize for the quality of the images. You know, one of the I've obtained some digital images. One of the great problems with the microfilming that was widely done in the 60s and 70s is it's melting. It's physically degrading as we speak. And of course, no one saw this coming in 1958. This was considered a brilliant solution to all these documents. And I think you catch just a glimpse of that in this. But at any rate, here's an instance. And the other thing that's kind of fun, the reason I include this, is that up in the corner, you see that word Deus? That's God. That's Allah. So here you have the Arabic notation, and it's presumably for the person who's still doing the translation. And then you, if you had the rest of this picture, you would have the Latin translation, which is borrowing heavily from Catholic literature. Now, so much for the mechanics of this manuscript. I could bore you all night with the hundreds. Yes?
What's the number 33 there for? Is that the number of ayah?
I don't think so. I think it refers...
This is also from chapter number 2.
Yes. This refers, I think, to a note that he has made. Now, I didn't want to bombard you with tons of images, but Lomellini has developed his own sort of footnote system. Some numbers, some symbols that look like alchemical symbols of planets and things. There's apparently some Greek connection here. So I think this is for him.
It's actually number 33.
It is 33. It is 33.
Verse number 33, chapter 2.
Okay, so this is a direct reference. Thank you. Thank you very much, because I wasn't sure about that.
It is accurate.
Yeah.
Now, to sort of contextualize this, because that's enough of the technical stuff, let me sort of take a step back and say 400 years ago, when the first serious, sustained attempt to translate this document was underway, what else is going on in Christian-Muslim relations? You are looking at two pieces of the lead books of Sacromonte. Does that ring any bells here? Okay. Late 16th century, Iberian Peninsula. There are a lot of recently converted so-called Moriscos living in the kingdom of Spain. There's a lot of social and legal problems that these individuals face. Suddenly, two Moriscos, with the support of a local bishop and some Jesuits, discover these documents, which are allegedly, according to the discoverers, in some form of Arabic that shows that the early Christian inhabitants of the Iberian Peninsula were Arab speakers. They are forgeries, these objects. They're, when the period that is alleged here, the 4th century of the Common Era, there aren't really a lot of Arab speakers in the Iberian Peninsula. But I bring this up because the use of documentation to protect Muslim or formerly Muslim populations within majority Christian communities was a big ongoing thing. And if you will, these metal objects with this strange script on them killed two birds with one stone. They offered some limited protection to people of Arabic ancestry or Arab-speaking ancestry in the Iberian Peninsula by saying, we were good guys. Way back when, 1,000+ years ago, we were actually Christians. It also made Sacromonte the Disney World of the early 1600s because it was now a destination for people from all over Europe. Go to this place. It's a place of pilgrimage. Discover this connection that is 1,000 years old. Be sure to stay in such and such an inn and buy some souvenirs while you're in town. And this ran for years. In fact, the man who did most of the research on this told me that today, in 2016, that some of the Catholic religious community in this place in Spain still maintain that these are authentic documents and only shared them with scholars in a very limited way because they basically don't want to stop what this is all about. So I bring this in because there are multiple agendas going on here. There is the agenda of a Jesuit with 40 years time available on his hands, if you will, with a talent for languages, a friend who's a powerful cardinal and whose brother is the head of the Jesuit house in which the Jesuit I've been talking about will die eventually in 1645. So there's patronage, There's, I'm doing hard, important work which could lead to the evangelization of the Turk, as each and every Muslim is called in this period in history. There is the patron, who may be posing as a, or not just posing, but who is positioning himself as an open-minded man of letters who will even allow a priest to translate a document that is on the index of forbidden books as proclaimed by a pope who just happened to be one of his relatives. There's another audience, other Jesuits who perhaps were supposed to study this document and the translation and use the arguments in the commentaries more than the text itself to try to reconvert people who had been born Christian, who had become Muslim, and who had fallen into the hands of Christians once more in warfare or in the ransom industry, which was very big industry in the Western Mediterranean. Many of those individuals would be women, in fact. So there's a female component. So just let me draw back here and sort of review the other questions that I think are worth talking about. The intended audience, those are my theories about this, but obviously one could go much further. There remains the mystery of why was this document not only never published, and there's a multi-volume work that was produced by two Jesuits in the 19th century who collected every scrap of published material that had any connection with the Jesuits. It's called Sommervogel because that's one of the names of the two Jesuits who compiled it. There's no mention of this Lomellini guy that I've been talking about anywhere in there. And why did the Catholic Church never do anything with this? Why did they not draw upon it, even though it is both better than the translation that came before or the translations that came after in many cases? I've raised the question of Lomellini getting help with the Arabic and writing and translating. Where did Cardinal Orsini obtain the Arab texts? There's the question of Deus as God. But I also want to spend a few minutes on the last question, which attempts to answer the issue, so what? Because there are thousands and thousands of documents in European archives and libraries, and there are hundreds of academics hoping to make careers discovering documents that they hope they'll be able to argue are important or groundbreaking or change what we understand about something. And it's fair to ask, so what? These are my thoughts as a practicing Christian and a member of the Episcopal Church engaging with this document, what my own thoughts are about this Christian engagement. First of all, I think the translation and commentary split with their possible different audiences and possible different tones and indisputably different literary references shows, I don't want to use the word schizophrenic because this term is overused in a non-scientific way to describe a lot of engagements across cultures, but there is a very difficult gap that's very hard to bridge between an engagement with a document that is a historical object and an understanding of the political and social contexts in which the translator is living. Okay? Lomellini lived through the defeat of the Sultan's navy at Lepanto. Any chance he gets, he'll mention it again. And he even says, because he is a Baroque Jesuit, there were our angels and there were their angels. Our angels are better. Okay? And he's not speaking metaphorically or in hyperboles. He's speaking in a world of angels. And this is right below a rather careful translation. Lomellini is a debater. He is a man. He is in a religious order that only has male members, and that's fairly unusual in the Catholic Church. Actually, there was one for sure female Jesuit, but she was totally hushed up as Brother Rodrigo, and she was related to the king, so she was male for all practical purposes, but that's not tonight's lecture. Anyway, he's in a male organization that does things in a very male way. If you hang around with Jesuits, they don't say things like, I'm feeling your pain. It's a masculine culture to this day, and he's up against another male. Who's the other male? The prophet. And let me speak about his three major beefs with the prophet. I won't claim that they are original, but I think they are significant because they are still part of the discussion that goes on everywhere about Muslims and non-Muslims. First beef with the prophet, he's low class. There are metaphors where where Lomellini has taken a line from a Roman poet named Horace, where Horace is disrespecting barbers in the slums of Rome and saying, you know, where you got your information, that's the gossip of barbers. And it's a quote, you know, you can find it. It's in a famous poem by Horace. Well, one criticism of the Qur'an as he's encountering it, Lomellini, is, oh, this is the junk you hear at the barber shop. This is tall tales. And of course it would be, because this guy is this kind of he's at like the social level of a barber. So that's one accusation. A second accusation, these are also none of these are original, is Muhammad's a liar. He's a mendax. He doesn't tell the truth. He's mendacious. He's deliberately misleading people. And he's misleading people, and he means mostly men people, by proposing a physically sensuous paradise as a payoff, and by implication appealing to the lusts, sexual and other, of anyone who would like to get into that paradise. And on the one hand, Lomellini can quote passages to support his arguments. On the other hand, he is the celibate member of an all-male order himself. So this is a complex situation. It's two men, the prophet, who isn't there to debate Lomellini, and Lomellini. So a low-class guy. Lomellini's got all kinds of nobility in his family, but the prophet's a kind of a barbershop lowlife and other things. Lomellini has taken a vow to support the church glorious and triumphant. He's not supposed to tell any lies. Muhammad's a liar. Thirdly, and these all overlap, they don't exist discreetly, they dovetail. Thirdly, Lomellini offers his own identity as a Jesuit, as a priest, as a Catholic, as someone whose morality is very clearly set forth. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but the Catholic Church went through a period of rather generously interpreted morality. If you've read any Chaucer, you may have seen a bit of that period. And then there's what is generally called the Reformation and the crackdown, something called the Council of Trent, where bishops gather and say, concubines for priests, drunken guys saying mass, guys out hunting when they're supposed to be attending to sick people. We're gonna tidy this up. Here are the rules. Bang, bang, bang. And all these rules go down just about the year that Lomellini is born. They're all codified in 1563. So Lomellini, or at least his institution, he would freely admit that he's a miserable sinner, but his institution represents, in his view, a very high state of morality. But the prophet himself, in this exposition, in this critique, in this commentary, is driven too much by emotion. He's too sensuous. He's too violent. He's epileptic. All this, the usual stuff. Again, nothing original here, but very nicely assembled. Now, when I began this project, you learn a lot, especially when you go and you meet smart people who know stuff that you don't know. But even before you meet the smart people, you have to retool your question. Years ago, I started a project. I wanted to know when the first Jews attended Catholic universities in Central Europe. I thought it was a bean counting exercise. You go in, you open the book, and where it says Israelite in German and the University of Vienna archives, you make a check mark, and then you have your numbers and your dates. That was the wrong question. The interesting question in the 18th century in Vienna, in Graz, and in Prague is not how many Jews, but who gets to decide what a Jew is? The student? the professor, the university, the faculty, the emperor? Because the answers vary. And you'll find a person identified as a Jew on one page when he's taking history, and identified as a non-Jew on the next page where he's taking history. I only mention this because I had the wrong question here. I wanted to know when I started this, how good a translation was this? That seemed like a clean-cut question, because there are other translations. The terrible one that I mentioned, a quite good one that was published in 1698 by a guy named Marachi. 19th and 20th century translations like Pickthall and so on. Still an interesting question, but the real question is, at least as I now see it, is what is the interaction between trying to engage with the text and do your absolutely Boy Scout best job to comprehend it, and the values, the experiences, the fears, and the hopes that you inevitably bring as a human being when you come to that task. And I will close by saying that I've had to examine some of my own motives and my own understandings and my own fears as I've gotten involved with this. These aren't just 1622 questions, because you cannot, in my view, separate the scholarly undertaking from the human experience of belief and difference. And with that I will close, because I think it's been 40 and I want to give time for questions. Thank you for your patience.